Welcome back to Lanny Delight Chess. Today I'm taking you through round 2 that I just completed of the Melbourne Chess Club Classic. Today I had the white pieces against a 15-10 rated opponent and was able to secure a draw. So let's have a look. Here I plays d4, my pet opening, and knight c3. Opponent develops the knight to f6 to try and hold this central pawn. And here we play bishop f4, initiating the Jobava London. Here opponent plays a6, a solid move, stopping any tricks for the knight b5 hop. This is the trick in the Jobava London if black doesn't know his line and plays what's seemingly a natural developing move, knight c6. This runs into these nasty tactics where the knight from b5 tries to hop knight c7, forking the rook and the king. It's a lot of theory in this line where black has to play back for the center and block this bishop, but white can get initiative here. So often players facing the Jobava London will play, as my opponent has, playing a6, stopping this central knight hop to b5. Here we make a normal developing move, e3, getting ready to get the bishop out to bishop d3, its natural home in the London. And opponent plays bishop f5. I do like facing this line. It seems rather symmetrical. Often if you get the London, this is ultra symmetrical. But here we haven't developed, in the normal London, we haven't developed the knight to f3. So here I do like this line where I play the pawn to f3. Often touted as a poor move. Never push f3 or f6. But in this lines here, I like to play the pawns against this bishop and get an early attack on the king side with a pawn storm. Computer already deems this inaccurate and wants the knight to hop to f3 instead. But that's where we went with f3, getting ready to kick the bishop around. Opponent sees that that's already the initiation and they develop h6 to get ready to retreat the bishop. When I do play the natural developing move of g4, attacking this bishop. Bishop's going to run. Opponent plays bishop h7, retreating. Computer would prefer to bring the bishop back just one square, backwards to g6. But h7, perfectly reasonable. Often white does this in the London system as well, pushing h3 and bringing their dark squared bishop back. But we've got the reverse here in this Jobava London. Here we develop our bishop, light squared bishop, to d3. This brings the bishops into contact. We don't mind if black takes. It's going to help us develop our queen and castle king queen side, which we're going to have to after pushing all these pawns. There's no more prospects of castling king side. We're going to have to castle long here. So we don't mind taking back. Obviously it's sad to part ways with these bishops, but we get the natural square for the queen to go to d3 and castle long. Here opponent plays e6. Definitely a natural place for the pawns to go to, getting this pawn chain, leaving the tension between these bishops and leaving our queen stuck for now, with our king unable to castle just yet. And here I played straight away for this pawn storm push, playing h4 with ideas of g5 to follow up. Computer wants to release the tension between these bishops. There's a long line here that the computer shows where black drops the knight back to recapture and get some more natural development with c4. Perhaps a line. If we have a look quickly, this idea after takes and bringing this knight out. The computer wants to develop the knight, keep pushing towards the center, and finally this c5 push, which is a central break, often played in the Jobava London, getting ready to put pressure. Here the computer says we need to push back with e4, timely, as we're going to hit with one of these moves, either pushing or taking. Pushing not so good because we're going to take. after we get the queen out of the way. So if black was to push, we get the queen to a safer square, getting these pieces lined up together, and black's going to have a hard time to figure out what they're doing in this center. Here we can start to kick the bishop around, and even after take back with the queen, take back with the knight, and eventually, even with short castle, we're going to have play in the center here, breaking up these pawns. Obviously with the rook coming through, it's going to be harder because we're going to get our queen exposed. Perhaps we play on, bring the rook, and continue to press our pawn storm on the king side. But none of this happened anyway, so here opponent actually trades off, releases the tension, and we take back with the queen. Again, natural development square for the queen, and gives us the opportunity to castle long, which we're going to do shortly. Here, the opponent brings the tension back to the bishops, the dark square bishops this time, developing to d6. Again, the computer always screaming for this c4 push. Very natural move in the Jobava London, as white has stopped their ability to push c4. Often in these queen's pawn openings, this d4 opening, the central pawns come together, d4 and c4, rather than e4, d4 and c4. But in the Jobava London Shikoran variation, we've cut off our ability to push c4, as our knight is sitting on c3. So black often has timely response with c5. And then a decision to be made about taking, or like we analysed just before, whether this pawn is going to take or push. Here, continue development. Knight g, e2, reinforcing this bishop here. So if ever black takes, we can take back with the bishop, take back with the knight, so we don't ruin our pawn structure in the center here. Computer saying castle straight away, but again, I'm bringing this knight to help reinforce our pieces that are already developed. It's feeling good at this point. I was feeling like ready to castle. We've got the pawns already to storm. We've got some pressure that's going to be mounting. We're going to have the rooks connected shortly, and we've got all the pieces out and ready to play. And black is still lagging a little bit in development, figuring out where this knight's going to go, where the queen's going to go, and ultimately which way the king's going to castle. Here, black does play knight c6, very natural development square. I was wondering again which square the black knight was going to come to, knight c6. Again, c4 always been an option. I felt like this at least put some pressure on the center, but we're not going to have to deal with c4, which can often be quite frustrating to deal with in the center. We go ahead and castle now. So now we've got our king to safety, we've got our rooks connected, and we're ready for this g5 push, ready to release the tension on the king side if need be, and these rooks are defending each other. So if we ever play g5 and pawn takes, we have these rooks connected, so the rooks, if ever traded, we can redeploy our other rook to what will potentially be an open H file. Here, opponent gets the queen up, obviously looking to also castle queenside, not liking the prospect of castling into this pawn storm. Fair enough. So getting ready to castle. Here, computer already suggesting to, again, alleviate the tension between these bishops, but I thought this was a very logical move, putting pressure onto the knight. Here, the knight has only really got two prospects, to h5 or backwards to its starting square on g8. It's not going to be jumping to its demise into the center, and the queen just took another potential natural square for the knight. Perhaps that's why the computer was suggesting queen e7 rather than queen d7, so this knight can retreat to a passive square, but one that can help support the center with perhaps break with e5, pawn break on e5. Here, opponent decides on knight h5. This does put pressure back onto the bishop and looks to potentially hop in the future, but obviously is on the rim in this scenario here. So less prospects for it to develop to. Only having these four squares, but with the pressure on the bishop, at least there's a logical square for it to go to. And this is where I release the tension. We could drop the bishop all the way back, perhaps recapture with the rook, but I thought this was logical to capture here on d6, bringing the queen forward. Obviously black doesn't want to take c takes d6 because it would open up the king if the king's going to castle to the queen side here, leaving a gaping hole in front of the king. So yeah, queen captures. Thought here too, black has spent 2 tempi on the queen move. So I thought also a logical move to capture, get the queen to move again, and now this knight is stuck on the rim. This knight is being controlled right now by our knight and our pawn on e3, as well as this pawn here on g5. So this knight is going to have a tough time getting off the rim into the future. Here I captured on g captures on h6. Did consider this push, which the computer wants, g6. I thought after opponent plays f6, even though this pawn is a bit of a thorn in the side of black, I did think it really doesn't have long-term prospects. I thought here black is just going to push, and even if we do bring the rook, which was the plan anyway, to bring it onto this semi-open g file, here black just castles, and the game is still equal, but I felt like there was less prospects with all these pawns on the board still, not a single pawn traded or captured. I felt like it was going to be hard to get any kind of play where I had this natural move, which I played in the game, of capturing away from the center, but having this semi-open G file that we can put pressure with these rooks, either maybe even doubling in the future, but at least bringing one rook to this G file sooner rather than later. Opponent captured back with the rook, obviously keeping the pawn structure intact. I thought they might want to capture with the pawn to also try and fight back on the open G file, that would be open G file. But obviously the computer and the opponent thought alike, that keeping the pawn structure intact, bringing this rook up so it can swing in the future as well. Perhaps even castling and bringing these rooks both onto the H file was also a prospect for the future. Here I played my rook to the G file. This, again, semi-open file, putting pressure onto the G7 pawn, which is defended by the knight at this stage. But this also controls infiltration squares for both the knight to come or the queen in the future, as well as putting pressure again on this G7 pawn. Felt like this justified my capture away from the center with the G pawn, bringing this rook to at least have some prospects in the future. Computer doesn't love it. Computer at this stage is finally saying that I've lost whatever potential advantage there was. Negative 0.5 at this point. In real terms, completely equal position for humans. But yeah, obviously computer thought would have been better to preserve the pawn structure and yeah, not play for this semi-open file. Here opponent castled. Logical move, getting away from this danger on the what was the king side of the board, even though the kings are all the way over on the queen side now. Here thought for quite some time about what was the next prospects, and computer didn't love knight a4. The whole point was to try and get the knight to c5, but this did send my opponent into a long think. They spent nearly half an hour in this position, contemplating the fact that I was going to be bringing the knight to c5 and there wasn't anything they could do about it. Can't control this square with a pawn because it's going to drop the pawn on a6. Can't develop straight away, pushing b5 because the knight is still just going to hop and there's going to be outposted. So opponent, spent a long time here, half an hour thinking, which they were down 60 minutes, down from the 90 minutes we had at the start. 90 plus 30 is the time control. So already by this point they were 60 minutes and they spent another 30 minutes here thinking about their move and came up with this knight a7. Even after this inaccurate move, knight a4, I was feeling rather confident here, thinking my opponent spending all that time must have been a good sign for me. Thought I had pretty logical attacking prospects. Again, bringing the knight to c5, perhaps the queen coming to the b file and putting some pressure. Although this does thwart a lot of the prospects, the prospect of bringing the knight and the queen whilst the knight was still sitting on c6 was a lot stronger prospect. Obviously now the queen guards along the 6th rank and can swing across at any time and threaten to trade our queen. Here, continue with the plan, knight c5. Computer deems this the correct plan, getting the knight off the rim and towards the center on this very strong square. Again, having attacking prospects. Here, opponent, again, trying to shut down all our play against the queenside, the castle. The overall plan was to, again, bring the queen to b3 and try and attack on this weak b7 square. But opponent really trying to lock things down on the queen side over here. At this stage, I went into a long think of my own. Was looking at a number of different things about how I could possibly maybe swing the queen on the dark squares, perhaps either through a3, retreating the knight and trying to break in on the dark squares through the queen side towards the center. I also had ideas about bringing the other knight through here, either to try and attack the queen, to reinforce, to try and stop the knight being remobilized from a7 to b5. So I could trade off those knights. But also with the prospect of maybe bringing the queen back and mobilizing through the dark squares on the king side. So was looking for some plans here. Wasn't really sure where I was going to go. Was hoping to put some pressure on these weak pawns on the F and G files. So really thinking, trying to come up with some concepts here about what I was going to do myself. So I spent about 7 minutes deciding on knight c3, again with the idea of bringing the knight, connecting these knights together, putting pressure on the queen. Again, perhaps swinging the queen to the king side and bringing it in on the dark squares to try and infiltrate and get to the king. Did also consider some rook lifts, perhaps even just bringing the rook up one square to try and play against this pawn on g7, but also considered bringing the rook all the way to play against the knight, to double with a more active rook on g5, but obviously didn't think that highly of it because there's still pawns that can kick away that rook there. Opponent here solidifies the structure, playing g6. Here, shutting down any prospects of fighting against this pawn here. Does also release the knight to start to come back into the game, so it doesn't have to control this and protect this pawn anymore. Computer wants the queen to come back and start to put pressure on the knight. But yeah, very logical move, solidifying this pawn structure and playing against what will be a long-term weakness of my h-pawn. If these pieces come off the board, I'm going to be playing this isolated h-pawn, which could be an outside passer in the future, but is more likely to be a liability, playing against this very solid structure on the light squares. And potential blockades as well. It's already blockaded now by this knight, so there's not much to play against here as well. Here I continue with the plan of bringing these knights together and putting some pressure on the queen. Knight 3, a4, not c, number 3 for the third rank. Computer saying perhaps that plan about bringing the queen backwards is the way to go. Trying to infiltrate on the dark squares. Again, the computer is trying to fight back against the dark squares here. And then we've got this idea of this central break e4, which is another thing I was considering for quite some time. This knight move here that I played to c3, I had my own think about, and then this second knight jump. So I spent 7 minutes on the first knight jump, and then 12 minutes on this second knight jump here. Was also considering this idea of e4, trying to break towards the center. Perhaps would have worked here, but was terrified against this knight hop. Computer does like it, but I felt like this was some added pressure against the queen, allowing this knight to come back into the game in a very strong position, where it was being controlled by a pawn on e3. Computer saying we develop perhaps against this knight, or even backwards here. Probably better to try and swing across. But this does relinquish control of this pawn. Here computer saying we just liquidate, and we take with the pawn, and finally the computer's suggesting that the pawn comes to defend this knight. Here we still got the shattered structure, another isolated pawn. This knight is now outposted. It's going to be very difficult to do much against this knight. Really didn't think a hell of a lot about the prospects here. Computers are saying you take. Perhaps the rook is the one that's going to come in the future, or as the computer's saying here, trade off these knights. Even though you've got these pawn weaknesses, computer isn't too fast, suggesting that even though black is slightly better, negative 0.2, still very much a drawish game here. Point was all moot on this, so returning to the actual game, it was knight 3, a4, locking these knights together, and opponent here offers the queen trade, and in making that move also offered the draw. Thought about this for a few moments. I thought perhaps taking and damaging the pawn structure, bringing the knight back, there was something to play for. But considering that I've got my own pawn weakness, again on the h-file, wasn't too thrilled about the prospect of a long endgame. Still plenty of time for us both. I had 38 minutes on the clock and opponent had 30 minutes on the clock. It's definitely situational as well, being round 2 of a tournament, my third tournament ever, with results being that I've only ever had one win in those 3 tournaments and no draws, with 9 losses. That also did play into the psychology here. And even though there was plenty to be learnt about perhaps playing on into this endgame, even the more natural move of taking and trading down, the computer hates anyway. Did consider the idea of rerouting along the dark squares, but again, this is potential long-term weakness against these knights. And the game did feel in the balance. I felt like I played a good game, put some pressure on a 1500 rated opponent. Felt like I used my clock well. I felt like the pressure was right, and in analysis there's a few inaccuracies, especially these knight jumps at the end. Trying to get the knights through a4, the computer didn't like either of those knight a4 jumps. But I felt like in general the game was good and solid, and that the draw was a respectable result. If the possibility of a draw comes up again in this tournament, I think it also depends on the opponent and how I play, particularly in the opening. I think if I was feeling this good, like I was in this game, perhaps I wouldn't take a draw. But again, just to shake off the jitters of round 2, having one loss against my name, getting half a point at least, not going to finish this tournament on 0. So that also was a positive prospect for me as well, psychologically, and hopefully moving into round 3, going to get the black pieces again, can have that positive mindset of trying to go for a win, and continue to improve this tournament. So yeah, that's round 2 of the MCC Classic. I look forward to bringing you round 3 next week. Thanks so much for tuning in to Learning to Light Chess. Look forward to seeing you again next week.